Hey, this is a everyday commentary, and this is a review of this knife. And this knife is the Condor Knives and Tools Bushlore. And the Bushlore is a knife that has a design that goes back quite a ways. If you read Morris Kahansky's book, Bushcraft, he talks about the design for a good outdoor utility knife. And the thing that he talks about is you want to have rounded, comfortable handles, and you want to have a blade that exists in a continuous arc. So essentially the whole blade is belly. And there are a bunch of different knives that meet this description. You can get the Bark River Bushcrafter. The Spyderco Bushcrafter comes pretty close. There's a knife called the Skookum Bush Tool, and it looks very similar to that. But out of all of those knives, this is by far the cheapest of them. And this knife cost me $36 and includes this nice leather sheath. And actually the sheath is really quite nice. Very impressive. Sheaths typically stink on fixed blade knives, but this one is quite good. And so what we have in here is a relatively large, I wouldn't say this is like the size of a chopper, but this is bigger than most of the utility style knives I carry when I go outdoors or do outdoor tasks. This is pretty big. If you see how long the handle is and how long the blade is, I mean, this is not a knife you want to mess with. It will definitely do batoning tasks if you need to. It's relatively thick. I think it's 3/16 inch thick. Maybe a little bit thicker, maybe thinner. Maybe it's 5/32. And right here you can see it has a nice Scandi grind, which is another thing that Morris Kahansky recommends. And you can see what he's talking about. There is no real flat portion of the blade. It just runs all the way up to the edge, and there's a little bit of curve there. This knife is made in El Salvador. I think I've already said this, but if I didn't, it's in 1075 steel. So you can see the mark there. And it's decent. It's not great. I wouldn't say this is like the best knife in the world. I probably would, if I wasn't reviewing knives, I probably wouldn't buy this knife. Simply because I don't have a whole lot of use for a knife that I just beat up, unless it's going to be like a big chopper, in which case I would beat it up and it would be bigger than this. So for like knives that are like utility camp style knives, I prefer something smaller. I mean, this is a really big knife for that purpose. So I would prefer something like this, which is, I just posted a video review of this knife. And that's the Bark River Adventurer. This is just 100 times more sophisticated. Now, it is much more expensive, but the amount of money that you pay, you know, maybe like 3 times the price. But we're really talking about basically 100, 120 bucks, 125 bucks. And, you know, that's a lot of money, but it's not probably, you're going to have one of these, you're going to have this kind of knife for, you know, 10 or 15 years. And over the life of the knife, I'd much rather spend the money on this knife than this knife. It's not to say that that knife is a bad knife. It's just, it's not something that I'm terribly taken with. The handle scales are walnut, which is fine. It's not like something super high end, and I do note that it kind of got a little stained pretty much right away. The steel itself isn't great steel. I put this blue lanyard on here so I could use it and chop with it. And it's the steel is. It's okay. I mean, they say they harden it to like 58 Rockwell, and it seems like it held as a pretty good edge. I did notice that it developed, that the edge sort of didn't roll, but it developed a burr really, really quickly, especially down here. I'm not sure how consistent the heat treat was. But like in comparison to, say, like the 1095 on my BK9, this is much, much different. It does not perform anywhere near as well. And it may be that this is just a thinner edge and I did different tasks with it, or I should have done different tasks with it. In fact, just kept doing what I normally do with the BK9. I like the knife. I like the design. I really like the handle shape and the feel of the handle, but I think I'd probably opt for something a little nicer. That being said, I don't think you can do much nicer when it comes to the sheath. The sheath is excellent, excellent, excellent. It tucks in real nice and deep. And I would imagine that over time this isn't going to hold its shape very well, but for what you're asking, I mean, for what you're paying for, it's just incredible. You can see there it's stitched, and the stitching is nice and even. It's a nice thick welded edge, and it's got this nice belt loop. You could do a whole lot worse than this sheath. There are lots of shitty sheaths out there, and this is not one of them. So the sheath is probably, you know, I don't know, an 18 out of 20, and the rest of the knife is probably a 13 or 14 out of 20. But the sheath is quite good, and given that that's much more important on an outdoor knife, this might just be something that, you know, if you're not sold on having an outdoor knife, this might be the thing that it's worth looking at. It's pretty good for the price, but for me, I want something a little smaller, something a little nicer, something with better steel. A review on this knife is coming soon, and